The dust-laden sun cast long shadows across Timber Creek as Abigail Rawlins stepped off the eastbound train. But this wasn't a homecoming. It was a retreat. Her 5-year-old son, Samuel, clutched her hand, his small fingers a vice, his grip betraying a nervousness that mirrored the frantic beating of her own heart. 8 years had passed. 8 years since she'd fled this frontier town, and the weight of those years, and the secrets they held, pressed down on her shoulders, far heavier than the worn carpetbag in her free hand. She wasn't just coming back to where she grew up. She was running back to the one place she swore she'd never see again. "Is this where Pa lives, Mama?" the boy asked, his voice a whisper against the hissing steam of the locomotive. Abigail's heart seized in her chest. A cold dread washed over her. She scanned the weathered buildings of Main Street, each one a ghost from a life she'd tried to bury. "This is where I grew up, Samuel," she answered, the words tasting like ash. She couldn't answer his real question. Not yet. Maybe never. Timber Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1878. It was the same dirt, the same unforgiving sky. But the girl who left was gone, replaced by a woman haunted by what she'd done, and terrified of what she was about to do. The journey from Boston had been a nightmare, but staying was no longer an option. Her parents were gone, their small inheritance a pittance against the dangers of the city. Timber Creek was her only sanctuary, her only chance, and her greatest fear. It meant facing the man she'd left behind, but it also meant facing the lie she'd been living for 5 long years. "Come along, Samuel," she said, her voice tight. "We need to find a place to stay." Samuel nodded, his dark hair falling across his forehead. It was his father's hair, his father's eyes too, a deep, thoughtful blue that saw everything and stored it away. Those eyes were a constant, painful reminder of the truth she'd concealed, the man she'd betrayed. The Silver Dollar Hotel looked just as she remembered, but the sign hung crooked now, like a broken bone. The paint, once white, was the yellow of old teeth. Inside, Mrs. Holloway, a woman whose face seemed permanently pinched in disapproval, looked up from her ledger. "Good afternoon," Abigail started. "A room, please." Mrs. Holloway studied her, her eyes missing nothing. The worn dress, the dark circles under Abigail's eyes, the boy hiding behind her skirts. "You look familiar," she said, her voice flat. "I grew up here," Abigail admitted. "Abigail Rawlins." Recognition flickered in the woman's eyes, but it wasn't friendly. "Little Abby Rawlins. Thought you'd gone east for good." Her gaze dropped to Samuel, and Abigail saw the cold calculation. The woman was counting the years. She was noticing the absence of a wedding ring. "My son, Samuel," Abigail said, her hand protectively on his shoulder. "I see," Mrs. Holloway said, a world of judgment in those 2 words. $2 a night. Includes breakfast." As she slid a tarnished key across the counter, the front door swung open. A gust of wind brought the scent of leather and horses, and a voice that stopped Abigail's heart cold. A voice that had haunted her dreams for 8 years. "Afternoon, Mrs. Holloway," the voice said. "That package from Denver come in." Abigail froze, her back to the door. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't turn around. "Not yet, Mr. Jackson," Mrs. Holloway replied, but her eyes darted from Abigail to the man in the doorway, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "But we have a guest you might remember. Abigail Rawlins has returned." Slowly, as if moving through water, Abigail turned. There he was, Flynn Jackson. The sun at his back made him a silhouette, a dark angel from her past. He was harder now, the lines on his face carved deeper by the sun and time. But his eyes, when they found hers, were the same piercing blue. They widened in shock, disbelief, and something else she couldn't name. "Abby," he breathed. "Hello, Flynn," she managed, her throat tight. His gaze fell from her face to the small boy at her side. Samuel, curious, stepped out from behind her skirts, and Flynn's entire body went rigid. He stared at the boy, at his dark hair, his steady gaze, his mother's chin. No, not his mother's chin, his grandmother's chin, Flynn's mother's chin. The air crackled with unspoken questions. Abigail knew in that moment that he saw it. He saw the truth. "This is my son, Samuel," she said, the words feeling thin and useless. Flynn knelt, his movements stiff. He looked from Samuel to Abigail, a storm brewing in his eyes. He saw the boy's blue eyes, a perfect match to his own reflection. Questions burned on his lips, accusations she knew she deserved. But before he could utter a single word, the hotel door creaked open again. A woman stepped inside, her laughter dying on her lips as she took in the scene. She was beautiful, with honey blonde hair and a dress that spoke of quiet wealth. "Flynn, darling," she said, her eyes narrowing as she looked at Abigail. "Are you coming?" Flynn stood up abruptly, a flush of guilt on his face. He looked trapped. "Abby, this is Annie Thornton," he said, the hesitation hanging in the air. "Annie, this is Abigail Rawlins, an old friend." Annie Thornton's smile was as sharp and cold as ice. "Miss Rawlins," she said, her gaze raking over Abigail's travel-worn clothes before dismissing Samuel entirely. "Welcome back to Timber Creek." The words were a welcome, but her tone was a warning. Abigail watched as Flynn, with one last agonized look at her and the son he'd just met, turned and followed Annie out the door. She saw them climb into a handsome wagon, Annie linking her arm through his with a possessive air. A raw, jagged pain tore through Abigail's chest. He hadn't just moved on. He was with Annie Thornton, the daughter of the wealthiest, most powerful man in the county. Mrs. Holloway clucked her tongue. "Well," she said with undisguised relish. That was interesting. Up in the small, musty room, Samuel finally asked the question that had been shadowing his face. "Mama, why did that man look so sad?" Abigail knelt, her hands trembling as she brushed the hair from his forehead. How could she explain? How could she tell this innocent child that the world was about to shatter around them? "He was just surprised to see me," she lied. But as she looked into her son's eyes, Flynn's eyes, she knew that lie was a flimsy dam against a flood that was about to break. She hadn't just come back to a lost love. She had walked straight into a trap. The next morning, Abigail woke with a grim resolve. She couldn't hide. She had to face Flynn, had to tell him everything, no matter the consequences. After a tense breakfast in the hotel dining room, where she felt the weight of every stare, she hired a buggy and set out for his ranch. The directions were easy to get. Everyone in Timber Creek knew where the Jackson Ranch was. It was the biggest, most prosperous spread in the valley. Flynn had done more than well for himself. He had built an empire. An empire, she now realized, he shared with Annie Thornton. As she approached the sprawling property, a dog started barking, and Flynn emerged from a massive barn. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw her. He approached the buggy slowly, his face a mask of caution. "Abby, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk, Flynn," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Alone." He glanced at Samuel, who was looking around with wide-eyed curiosity. Flynn's jaw tightened. He led them to the house, asking a kind-faced older woman, Mrs. Baxter, to watch Samuel by a nearby swing. Once the boy was out of earshot, they sat on the porch, the silence between them as wide and deep as a canyon. "He's mine, isn't he?" Flynn asked, his voice rough. He didn't wait for an answer. "Don't lie to me, Abby. Not now." "Yes," she whispered, the single word a confession that ripped her soul apart. "He's yours." Flynn closed his eyes, his face a canvas of pain, anger, and betrayal. 8 years, he said, his voice dangerously low. You kept my son from me for 8 years. Why? I was afraid, she began, but the excuse sounded pathetic even to her own ears. I was hurt. I thought you chose this ranch over me. I asked you to wait, he shot back, standing and pacing the porch like a caged animal. I told you I loved you, that I would build this for us. You were the one who ran. I didn't know I was pregnant when I left, she cried, tears finally breaking free. By the time I found out, I was in Boston, alone. I convinced myself you wouldn't want us. You didn't give me a choice, he roared. He stopped pacing and stared at her, his blue eyes blazing with a fire she'd never seen before. You have no idea what you've done. He took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to regain control. What do you want, Abby? Why are you here now? My parents are gone, she explained numbly. I have nowhere else to go. Samuel, he deserves to know his father. Flynn looked past her, his gaze fixed on the small boy laughing on the swing. For a moment, the anger in his face softened, replaced by a profound, heart-wrenching sorrow. Does he know? No, I told him his father was a good man who couldn't be with us. Before Flynn could respond, a cloud of dust announced an approaching rider. It was Annie Thornton, her face a thundercloud. She dismounted with an angry grace, her eyes locking on Abigail. What is she doing here, Flynn? Annie demanded, ignoring Abigail completely. We're talking, Annie, Flynn said, his voice strained. I'm sure you are, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She turned to Abigail, her polite mask from the hotel gone, replaced by pure venom. Whatever you're planning, it won't work. Flynn is with me now. Timber Creek is my town. You would do well to remember that. Just then, another rider appeared. A large, imposing man with cold gray eyes and an air of absolute authority. It was Elias Thornton, Annie's father. He dismounted and strode onto the porch, his presence sucking all the air out of the space. He gave Abigail a look of pure contempt. I heard you were back in town, he said, his voice like grinding stones. I thought I made it clear 8 years ago that you weren't welcome here. Abigail's blood ran cold. Made it clear? She remembered a tearful goodbye with Flynn, a desperate escape to Boston. But Elias Thornton's words hinted at something far more sinister. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, her voice trembling. Thornton laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. Don't you? Let me refresh your memory. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. You will get in your buggy. You will take that boy, and you will be on the next train out of town. If you are not, I will make you wish you had never been born, just like I promised you last time. The threat was not just a warning. It was a reminder of a forgotten terror. Abigail stared at him, then at Flynn, who looked confused and torn, and then at Annie, whose triumphant smirk confirmed her deepest fears. She hadn't just run away from a broken heart. She had been chased away. And now she had returned to the lion's den. Elias Thornton's threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Abigail looked at Flynn, hoping he would intervene, would demand an explanation. But Flynn just stood there, his face a mixture of confusion and a deep, unsettling weariness. He was trapped between the past and the present, and Abigail realized with a sickening lurch that he was not the same man she had loved. He was a man entangled in the Thorntons' web. I think you should go, Abby, Flynn said finally, his voice devoid of emotion. He wouldn't meet her eyes. The words were a physical blow. She had come all this way, confessed the truth, and he was siding with them. Betrayal, sharp and bitter, rose in her throat. Without another word, she turned, collected a confused Samuel, and fled the ranch. The ride back to town was a blur of tears and terror. Thornton's threat wasn't idle. She remembered now, Through a haze of youthful pain, his cold voice on the night she left, warning her to never come back, hinting that Flynn had already moved on, that there was nothing for her here but shame. She had believed him. She had been a fool. Back at the hotel, she locked the door, her mind racing. She was penniless, friendless, and targeted by the most powerful man in the territory. Leaving was the logical choice. But as she looked at Samuel, tracing the lines of his face, so reminiscent of Flynn, a spark of defiance ignited within her. She had been a scared girl then. She was a mother now. She would not let this man, or any man, threaten her son. She would not run again. Her first priority was a job. Her inheritance was nearly gone. She'd heard talk of a vacant teacher's position. With the education she'd received in Boston, she was more than qualified. The next morning, steeling her nerves, she went to the town hall to speak with the head of the school board. She walked into the office and froze. Sitting behind the large oak desk, a smug look on his face, was Elias Thornton. "Well, well," he said, steepling his fingers. "Miss Rawlins, to what do I owe the displeasure?" "I'm here to apply for the teaching position," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. He let out a short, barking laugh. "You, a woman of your reputation, teaching the children of this town? I think not." His words were loud, carrying out into the hallway where several townspeople had gathered, drawn by the confrontation. He stood up, his voice booming. "This woman abandoned her family and this town 8 years ago. She returns with a child of unknown parentage and expects us to welcome her with open arms, to entrust our children to her. Timber Creek is a decent, God-fearing community. We have no place for her kind here." Humiliation washed over Abigail as she backed out of the office, the whispers and scornful looks of the townspeople following her like a plague. Thornton had done more than deny her the job. He had publicly branded her. He was turning the entire town against her. That afternoon, Mrs. Holloway informed her that her stay at the hotel was no longer welcome, citing vague complaints from other guests. Desperate, Abigail found the only place that would take her in. A single dilapidated room above the saloon, the noise and smell of liquor a constant reminder of how far she had fallen. Days turned into a week. Her money dwindled. No one would hire her. Doors were closed in her face. Shopkeepers ignored her. Children were pulled away from Samuel in the street. They were pariahs. One evening, as she was buying a meager loaf of bread with her last few coins, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see a grizzled old man with kind eyes. "You're Abby Rawlins, ain't you?" he rasped. "I'm Jed. I used to work for your father." A flicker of hope ignited in Abigail's chest. "I remember you." Jed looked around nervously. "Listen, miss, what Thornton is doing to you, it ain't right. Your pa was a good man, a brave man." He lowered his voice. "Too brave, maybe. He was asking questions before he died. Questions about Thornton's land deeds, how he came to own so much of the valley so quick." Abigail stared at him, her heart pounding. "My father's death was an accident. He fell during a storm." Jed shook his head, his expression grim. "That's the story Thornton told. But your pa wasn't clumsy, and he wasn't alone on that ridge the day he died. I saw tracks, 2 sets of 'em." He pressed a small, worn, leather-bound book into her hand. "Your pa gave this to me for safekeeping the week before he fell. He said if anything happened to him, I was to see you got it." Abigail's hands trembled as she took the book. It was her father's journal. That night, by the flickering light of a single candle in her dingy room, she opened it. The pages were filled with her father's neat, steady script. He wrote of his suspicions about Elias Thornton, of forged documents and intimidated ranchers. He believed Thornton was systematically stealing land, building his empire on the ruin of his neighbors. And then she came to the last entry, dated the day before his death. "I have the proof," he wrote. "The original survey map is hidden. Thornton can't find it. It shows the true boundary lines for the old Miller place, the land he sold to Flynn Jackson. That ranch, half of it rightfully belongs to me. Flynn is a good boy, but he is being manipulated by a monster. I must show him the truth before it's too late." Abigail dropped the journal as if it were on fire. The truth slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. Flynn's ranch, the source of his wealth, the foundation of his life with Annie, was built on land stolen from her family. From her. Thornton hadn't just driven her away to secure a husband for his daughter. He had driven her away to secure an inheritance that wasn't his to give, and he may have killed her father to do it. The secret she had carried for 5 years paled in comparison to the one she had just uncovered. This wasn't about a lost love anymore. It was about murder, theft, and a dark conspiracy that held the entire town in its grip. And Flynn, the man she once loved, was standing right in the middle of it. The knowledge from her father's journal was a poison, seeping into every thought. Every time she looked out her window at the rolling hills, she no longer saw a beautiful landscape. She saw stolen land. Every glance at the prosperous Thornton store was a reminder of a fortune built on lies and, quite possibly, murder. She was trapped in a web of deceit, and Flynn was either a willing participant or a blind fool. She didn't know which was worse. She had to get to him. She had to show him the journal. But how? Thornton's eyes were everywhere. The town was a prison, and she was its most watched inmate. Her chance came unexpectedly. There was a town social, a barn dance to celebrate the harvest. It was a public event, and even Thornton couldn't bar her from attending without showing his hand too openly. Leaving a sleeping Samuel in the care of a saloon girl who'd shown her a sliver of kindness, Abigail slipped her father's journal into her dress pocket and walked toward the sounds of fiddle music. The barn was brightly lit, alive with laughter and dancing. But the moment she stepped inside, a hush fell over the crowd. The music faltered. All eyes turned to her, cold and accusing. She ignored them, her gaze sweeping the room, searching for one face. She found him standing with the Thorntons, a glass of punch in his hand. Annie was clinging to his arm, laughing up at him, the picture of idyllic love. When Flynn saw Abigail, his smile vanished. A flicker of something, guilt, anger, crossed his face before it settled back into a guarded mask. Elias Thornton glared at her, a silent order to leave. Abigail held her ground. She needed to speak to Flynn. Now. As if sensing her resolve, Flynn excused himself from the Thorntons and walked toward her, his movements stiff. The crowd parted for him, then closed in behind, their whispers a venomous hiss. "You shouldn't be here, Abby," he said, his voice low. "I have to talk to you," she insisted, her hand protectively over the journal. "There's something you need to see. Something about my father, about your ranch." His eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" Before she could answer, Annie was at his side, her face a mask of fury. "Flynn, don't listen to her lies. She's desperate. She'll say anything." "It's not a lie," Abigail said, her voice rising with emotion. "Your father is a thief and a murderer, and this whole town is letting him get away with it." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Elias Thornton strode toward them, his face purple with rage. "That's enough. I will not have this harlot slander my name." He grabbed Abigail's arm, his fingers digging into her flesh like talons. "Get out. Now." "Let her go," Flynn said suddenly. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise like a knife. He looked at Thornton, truly looked at him, and for the first time, Abigail saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He had seen the fear on her face, the raw conviction in her voice, and it had planted a seed. Thornton released her, surprised by Flynn's defiance. In that moment of confusion, Abigail pulled the journal from her pocket and thrust it at Flynn. "Read it," she pleaded. "Please, Flynn, read the last entry." Flynn took the journal, his eyes locked on hers. Annie tried to snatch it away, but he held it firm. He opened it, his gaze dropping to the page. The silence in the barn was absolute. Every person held their breath, watching as the color drained from Flynn Jackson's face. He read the entry once, then twice. He looked up, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. He looked at the prosperous ranch he had built, at the woman beside him, at the man who was to be his father-in-law, as if seeing them for the first time. The foundation of his entire life was cracking beneath his feet. "Is this true?" he asked Thornton, his voice a choked whisper. Thornton's face contorted in a sneer. "The ramblings of a bitter old man who fell off a cliff. The girl is manipulating you, Flynn. Are you going to believe her, or are you going to believe me?" Flynn looked from Thornton's enraged face to Abigail's desperate one. He looked at the journal in his hands, at the familiar handwriting of a man he had respected. He saw the truth, stark and terrible, reflected in the shifting eyes of Elias Thornton. "All this time," Flynn breathed, looking at Annie. "You knew. You all knew." The confrontation had shattered the illusion, but exposing the truth was not the same as getting justice. Thornton, seeing he had lost his hold on Flynn, wasn't about to surrender. He let out a cold, chilling laugh. "So, you found a little book. It proves nothing. I own this town, Jackson. I own the sheriff. What are you going to do?" He was right. A journal wasn't enough. Not against a man with that much power. The townspeople, caught between fear and a lifetime of loyalty to Thornton, began to mutter, to drift away. The moment was lost. Despair washed over Abigail. She had shown him the truth, but it had only served to isolate them both. Just as Thornton turned to leave, a voice cut through the tension. "He ain't the only one who knows something," Jed, the old ranch hand, said as he pushed his way through the crowd. "I was there that day. I saw you, Thornton, up on that ridge with her pa. I saw you argue, and I saw you push him." The accusation hung in the air, electrifying. Thornton went pale. For a moment he looked genuinely frightened, but it passed quickly, replaced by a cold fury. "You're a drunk and a liar," Thornton spat. "No one will believe you." "They'll believe this," Jed said, pulling a folded, yellowed piece of paper from his coat. "The original survey map. Her pa gave it to me with the journal. It shows exactly what you stole, Thornton. It proves everything." The room erupted. The map was concrete proof, something people could understand. It was one thing to hear about a murder, another to see evidence of a theft that had affected them all, that had allowed one man to grow rich while they struggled. Flynn took the map from Jed, his face grim as he unrolled it. He traced the lines with his finger, the truth now undeniable. His empire was a lie. Thornton saw the tide turning. He saw the looks on the faces of the people he had controlled for so long. He saw the fury in Flynn's eyes. His composure finally broke. "Sheriff," he bellowed, "arrest this man for slander. Arrest them both." The town sheriff, a portly man who owed his job to Thornton, stepped forward uncertainly. But Flynn was faster. In 2 strides, he was in front of Thornton, the map clutched in his fist. "It's over, Elias," Flynn said, his voice ringing with newfound conviction. "Your lies are done." But Thornton was not a man who went down without a fight. His eyes darted toward the barn door, then to Abigail. A cruel, desperate idea formed on his face. "It's not over yet," he snarled, and before anyone could react, he lunged, not at Flynn, but at Abigail. He grabbed her, pulling her in front of him as a shield, and dragged her toward the exit. A wave of panic went through the crowd. Annie screamed, a sound of fury and fear. Flynn started forward, but Thornton was already out the door, shoving Abigail toward the darkness. "Stay back, or she pays the price for your stupidity," Thornton yelled, his voice laced with madness. He began dragging her away from the barn, away from the light, toward the one place he thought he could escape. He was dragging her toward the saloon, toward the room where her son was sleeping. The night air was cold, a stark contrast to the heat of the barn. Thornton's grip was like iron on Abigail's arm as he dragged her through the dirt street. The townspeople spilled out of the barn behind them, a confused, angry mob. Flynn was at the front, his face a mask of cold fury, Jed right behind him. "Let her go, Thornton," Flynn yelled. "There's nowhere left to run." "You think so?" Thornton laughed, a ragged, unhinged sound. He shoved Abigail against the wall of the saloon, his eyes wild. He was a cornered rat, and that made him more dangerous than ever. "This is all her fault. She came back and ruined everything." His eyes flickered up to the single lit window on the second floor. Abigail's room. Samuel. A horrifying realization dawned on her. He wasn't just trying to escape. He was looking for leverage. "No," she breathed, struggling against his grip. "Not my son." Her terror seemed to fuel his madness. "A son for a father," he hissed, his meaning chillingly clear. He started pulling her toward the saloon staircase. A perfect trade. Suddenly a shot rang out, not from Flynn or the sheriff, but from the shadows of the alley beside the saloon. Elias Thornton crumpled to the ground, a dark stain spreading across his chest. He collapsed in a heap, his grip on Abigail finally releasing. Everyone froze, staring in stunned silence. From the alley, Annie Thornton stepped into the light, a smoking pistol in her hand. Her face was pale, her expression a terrifying mix of grief and cold resolution. "He would have destroyed us all," she said, her voice hollow. She looked at Flynn, her eyes pleading. It was the only way. The town stood in shocked silence, the body of its most powerful citizen lying in the dust. The web of lies was finally, brutally, torn apart. Annie had silenced her father to save herself, a final act of twisted loyalty and self-preservation. Flynn rushed to Abigail, pulling her away from the scene, his arms wrapping around her in a protective embrace. He held her tight, his body trembling with the adrenaline of the last few minutes. "Are you okay?" he whispered into her hair. She could only nod, her mind reeling. She looked from the body on the ground to the woman holding the gun, and then to the window above, where her son was safe. In the aftermath, the truth came out in a flood. The survey map, the journal, and Jed's testimony were undeniable. The sheriff, stripped of his protector, quickly sided with the town, placing Annie under arrest. The full scope of Thornton's crimes was laid bare. The stolen land, the intimidation, the murder of Abigail's father. Timber Creek had been living under the thumb of a tyrant, and now it was free. But the freedom came at a bloody cost. Days later, Flynn found Abigail sitting on the porch of the small house she had finally been able to rent, watching Samuel play in the yard. The town was slowly finding its new equilibrium. The stolen lands were being returned to their rightful owners, a process Flynn himself was overseeing, starting with the portion of his own ranch that belonged to Abigail. He sat beside her, the comfortable silence a welcome relief after years of turmoil. "I'm so sorry, Abby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Sorry for not believing you, for not seeing the truth that was right in front of my face." "We were both deceived, Flynn," she said softly. "He built his world on lies, and we were all just living in it." He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. It felt right, natural. "My ranch, our ranch, half of it is yours, by right." She shook her head. "It's Samuel's. It's his birthright." She looked at him, her heart full of a feeling she thought she had lost forever. All I ever wanted was a family, for him to have a father. Flynn's gaze followed hers to their son, who was chasing a butterfly, his laughter echoing in the quiet afternoon. A slow smile spread across Flynn's face, reaching his eyes and erasing the last of the shadows. "He has one," he said. "If you'll have me. Both of you." He squeezed her hand. "I know I don't deserve it, after everything, but I never stopped loving you, Abby. Not for a single day." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes, but this time they were tears of joy, of release. The long, painful journey was over. "I love you too, Flynn," she whispered. From the yard, Samuel called out, "Mama, Pa, come see." They looked at each other, the word Pa hanging in the air between them, a promise of everything to come. They stood up, hand in hand, and walked toward their son. A family, forged in secrets and lies, but finally free. They had found their way back not just to a place, but to each other. Their past was a story of pain and loss, but their future, stretching out before them under the wide Wyoming sky, was a clean, unwritten page. It's amazing how a single choice can change everything, isn't it? One woman's decision to stop running set in motion a chain of events that brought down a tyrant and freed an entire town. If you enjoyed this story of secrets, justice, and second chances, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales from the dusty pages of history.